Okay, so if everybody's okay with that, we are recording. All right, and so now I will make Eva the host. Okay. All right, well, welcome everybody. I appreciate everybody being here today. This is one of our HDSA New Jersey chapter education days, celebrating success and planning for your future. And so as we move through the day, we're going to be hearing a little bit about advocacy from Stacy Waterman and from Denise Sukow. I'll be talking a little bit about what might be going on for you in your clinic visits. And Eva Valianis is going to be talking with us about some genetics issues. And so just wanted to let you all know that this event is funded by the Huntington's Disease Society of America with support from Genentech and from Unicure. And it looks like we might have lost Stacy. So while we're, oh, there she is. And while we're waiting for her to come back, I'm going to get my screen going. She's going to talk to us a little bit again about advocacy. So I'm going to get her presentation. Apparently I'm not able to do that. All right, so I'm going to, all right, we're just gonna hope that nobody else comes in. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so that Stacy can do her presentation. All right, Stacy. Oh, I'm sorry. This is, I think, the wrong one. This one. Okay. Ooh, there we go. All right, Stacy.
Ready?
Yep.
All right. I just wanted to give you a brief update about advocacy and a little background on the legislation. And I also wanted to walk you through briefly about the New Jersey chapter and what we do. Next one. This is our board of directors. Our New Jersey mission is to improve the lives of everyone affected by Huntington's disease and their families. Our vision is a world free of Huntington's disease. Next. And we do a lot of things. The first one is we support HDSA's mission to serve families through support groups, social workers, building community, supporting youth. We advocate for change, and we're going to talk about that a lot today. We provide education, we build awareness, we raise funds, we are informed about the research, and we keep hope alive. And one of the things that we do is we do a lot of advocacy, and I want to focus on something that we've been working on a lot over the past, I want to say 12 years, but it's starting to get steam. And so I want to talk about the Parity Act. It's in the Senate and the House as well. Next one. And advocacy basically is speaking up politically, educating. Go back, Corlin one.
Hold on a second.
Thank you. Basically, what advocacy is, it's speaking up politically, educating in ways, raising awareness. It's engaging others affected by HD, building a nationwide movement and getting results. And why is it important for us? Because we're the experts. We know more about HD than members of Congress, the general public, and we have to tell them what it is. Congress needs to hear from us. Members of Congress are contacted by so many issues, and it's our responsibility as voters to tell them what's important to our community. And they're not going to act unless they hear from us. And the general public won't take notice unless we raise our voices together. Next one. I come from, so why is HD important to me? My family, of course. I come from a very long, it actually is on my mom's side. And so I just was trying to figure out how best to characterize how awful it is. And I just, they're putting up a Christmas wreath. I apologize. I tried to schematically show who was positive, who was at risk, and who was negative. All right, next slide. So why am I an advocate? My story, my family, the HD family. I have my doctorate from NYU in, I'm a geeky neuroscientist by training. My grandmother shook. We thought she had Parkinson's disease. And my mom started showing symptoms, but she never got tested. She always thought it was MS. She said that that was easier for her to live with because HD had no treatment and no cure. So I found out through my family history that it was HD. And HD, it's destroyed my family. A lot of my family is gone from it. And my brother, my daughter, my cousins' children and grandchildren are all at risk. But I'm a positive person. And so actually I kind of took care of the things that I could take care of, like got long-term health insurance and a really good long-term care plan. And then I just kind of focused on the positive and things that I could control in my life. And so it's changed how I lived my life. I live each day to the fullest. I lived in 3 countries, traveled all over the world, and I even skydived in New Zealand. I joined the board of directors so I can make a difference for me and my family. All right, next one. Corlin, next one.
Oh, after this? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, wait, yeah. So what, go back, sorry.
It's strange on how I go back. It won't let me.
It's okay. Thank you for doing this.
No, no problem. There you go.
All right. So what is the Parity Act? It is a bill that sits in the Senate and the House, and basically it's going to make people with HD receive Medicare benefits. Basically what happens now is once you're declared disabled, you have to wait 2 years to get your benefits. And so by passing this act, we will get rid of it. And this ensures people get health benefits in the early stages of HD. And the way that we've been doing it, our strategy has been you contact targeted officials, you tell your stories, and you ask members of Congress to co-sponsor it. And the next. And where we are today, this has been kicking around and Denise is gonna tell you about this a little bit too, for 12 years or so, but it was reintroduced in February of 2021, this year. So it's a new year, a new Congress, and new opportunities. So we are really trying to get it passed within the next 2 years so that we can finally we can finally get this passed. So it sits in the House and it sits in the Senate. And in the House, it sits in the Ways and Means Committee, and in the Senate, it sits in the Finance Committee. And basically, we just need help with outreach to our members of Congress. All right, next one, please. So where to start? Everything is so well organized. That little picture in the corner that didn't show up is, if you were to click on that link below, that picture in the corner is what you would see. Everything is so well organized by national, and you can go on the website and you can send a message to your member of Congress from the site. And if you were to click on that link below, the picture on the right that you can't see is what you would see. And there's a bullet that says, what can I do? And if you're on that website, you could send a message of Congress about the Parity Act by just clicking on that button. And so if you clicked on that button, it would take you, it literally will take a minute to do it. And saying that you want to support it, and it will go to your representative based on where you live. And also on the website, they have a resource and action center to check out how you could start to advocate for the Parity Act. And you could also join the advocacy caucus with HDSA if you want to get engaged and you have the time and energy to dedicate to it. It's actually something that was newly started this year, and it's got representatives across the US. And so we have really been working on that this year a lot. And next one. And one of the things that we did do is we did a virtual fly-in, and Denise will talk about her story in a little bit, but we did talk with a few of the members, 2 senators and 1 representative about it. And so we have been really active for New Jersey. Sorry, they're trying to hang my wreath. My kids are supposed to take care of it. So basically we could become, you could become an e-advocate to get updates when you need to hear from families, social media to stay informed, anything you could put on Facebook or Twitter. So it's if anybody wants to help us, we would love you to be engaged with us. And so I'm reminded every day how fortunate I am to work and serve, and I hope you'll join me in fighting for our families. And the last slide I wanted to show you was just a shout out to Governor Murphy and the Lieutenant Governor for declaring May 2021 as Huntington's Disease Awareness in New Jersey. For the last few years, we were actually able to get May declared as the awareness month. So I just wanted to shout out to them. And that's just a little bit about us and what we do. That's the Family Resource Guide. Next stage, it's online in print. Next slide. You can join us any way you want, attend, raise awareness, attend fundraising events, volunteer on a committee, join a support group, be an advocate. Next one. And that's how you get in touch with us. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Stacy. I really appreciate you sharing that information on advocacy. And I think the really important part is that it's so easy to do. Like you said, you can go right to the HDSA website, into the take action section, and they really walk you through it. So if you haven't done so already, it's really worth your time. I mean, 2 minutes of your time.
Yeah,
Make sure that
exactly.
our representatives know what it is we're asking for and what we need, because that 2 years of waiting time can be really significant for patients and for families. And if we can kind of push that through, people can get Medicare much more quickly. And for folks that are losing their health insurance because they can no longer work or for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So fucked up.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because it's been around forever. And Denise will tell you, I mean, when she gives her story, she's the reason I got involved, because I watched her on Facebook fighting the fight many years ago, you know, those pictures that she had with, so she's the reason I got involved, because you were my role model.
So we definitely would love to introduce Denise Sukow next. She's going to tell us a little bit about her story and why advocacy is so important.
Okay, thank you, Stacy, for that amazing presentation. Since Stacy took everyone through the nuts and bolts of the HD Parity Act, I will tell you about my journey with HD and advocacy. My name is Denise Sukow. I co-chair HDSA's Advocacy and Education Committee with Stacy. We are always looking for volunteers. I'm on the board of NJ Cure HD, and I'm from an HD family too. My family had no history of HD, so when my father became symptomatic, we were quite confused. In his late 40s, he became depressed, he stopped going to work, and he became very nasty. He started having jerky body movements. I have 2 sisters, and with my mother, we tried to figure out what was wrong with him. Every time we Googled his symptoms, HD would come up. And after reading about the gruesome effects that it has and that it was fatal, we decided he couldn't have that because it's hereditary and no one in our family had it. He was constantly getting worse. And my poor mother took the brunt of his symptoms and downright rage as he got worse. My oldest sister couldn't take the not knowing anymore and decided to have herself tested. She was going to get herself tested. To her heartbreaking surprise, she was positive for HD. And that's when everything changed. My sister, my other sister, and myself knew that we were at risk for this disease. And eventually we were tested positive also. My mother was heartbroken with her husband and her 3 daughters were all going to have Huntington's. It was then I decided to make a difference. I had to do something for all of us while I was still capable, and I wanted to help anyone that literally could not speak for themselves. I wanted to help families going through the early stages and help them to find the resources they needed.
There's silver.
What'd she say?
I think she might be talking about the Christmas wreath. I heard something about silver.
God, my family can't do anything if I'm not in the middle of it.
Okay, I've been advocating to pass the Parity Act since 2012. I have met with members of Congress and the Senate in DC and at their local offices. The first time I got a co-sponsor for the bill, I felt like a hero. It's an indescribable feeling. If you're considering taking action and becoming an advocate, I urge you to do so. There are many reasons, but here's just a few. Congress and the Senate work for us. They have to acknowledge and address our issues. Most often, they know nothing about HD and the Parity Act, and it's our job to educate them. It feels great to help people. Every little victory is a victory, and we celebrate it. We are going to pass the Parity Act in the next 2 years. We just have to. It just makes sense. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Denise. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I know it's not an easy thing to talk about, you know, especially, you know, it's clearly had such a huge impact on your family. And so, you know, I think I appreciate you putting yourself in, and I know it feels very vulnerable to do so.
Thank
But I
you.
think it's important because I think the more we put a face to it, you know, the better chance we have. Because when people can see it really in the human toll that it takes, I think that's how we get things done. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Agree. Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna do my presentation now. So I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. So I won't actually be able to see any of you as I do that, but I will take questions toward the end. And so just, you know, hold on to those. And when I stop sharing my screen, I'll be able to see all of your faces again. So, all right, here we go. All right. So my name's Corlin. I'm a social worker working with people with HD in several capacities, actually. I work as an HDSA social worker. I volunteer here on our HDSA New Jersey board. And I also work in a movement disorder clinic in South Jersey. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about what to expect and how to prepare for your clinic visit. Here's our disclaimer. Sadly, no relationships to disclose or list. So anyway, HD is a multidimensional disease. And in your clinic visit, they're probably going to address all of the different kinds of issues that may be affecting you and your family because of HD. So it may not be like your typical doctor's appointment where you just, you know, pop in, how's it going, and pop back out, because there are so many things that go into this. So your physical and your mental health are likely to be touched on by your doctor, as well as any psychosocial factors that might be going on for you and your family. So we know, you know, most of you with HD likely see a neurologist. And that neurological examination usually goes over three things: motor symptoms, sensory symptoms, and psychiatric symptoms. So likely they're going to be looking for, you know, how are your reflexes, balance, strength. And as far as the sensory symptoms go, they're going to be taking a look at, do you still have a sense of touch? How's your vision? Are you able to hear? And then psychiatric symptoms. So how's your mood been? How's your thinking been? Do you feel like you're able to, are these things affecting your daily life? And then oftentimes, and again, every clinic is different. So where you go, there may also be a psychiatrist who's going to talk to you. It may not necessarily be every visit. It's possible you may be referred out to see a psychiatrist. But a psychiatrist or a neurologist may talk to you about your emotional state. This may also be an instance where they may be asking your family members a little bit more about how they think you're doing, which can be difficult. I think it's really important, though, because I think for any of us with anything going on, it can be hard to really be honest with ourselves about how things are going. And so sometimes the people that love us may be able to step in and say, like, this is a little bit of how this has been looking from my end. They may be asking about different patterns of behavior. You know, if anything new has kind of popped up that wasn't happening before. How's the quality of your judgment? Have you been coping? What kinds of coping skills are you using? And then any signs of disordered thinking. So maybe some illogical kind of thinking, maybe assigning different ways of thinking to something that doesn't quite make sense to other people. And then evidence of substance abuse, which can be a coping skill. It's usually professionals don't necessarily find that to be our favorite coping skill for you to use, but sometimes it is used to help people cope. And so they may also order some brain imaging. And this may be something that your doctor may or may not do. So not every doctor feels a need to take a look at what's going on in your brain, but they may be interested in getting an MRI or a CT image. And that may be helpful for them over time. So they may kind of get like a baseline to see how your brain looks toward the beginning stages of HD, and then to be able to show where there are changes in the brain. And that may vary for different people. And then the images may also be used to rule out other conditions that may be causing symptoms. So it's possible to have HD and something else that is also causing issues. And so, you know, for instance, if it could certainly be possible that you could have a brain tumor or something like that, and they want to make sure that there's nothing else in there that they actually maybe could, you know, possibly remove or do something to help you. Genetic counseling and testing. And again, Eva's going to talk some more about this later, but your doctor may suggest genetic counseling and testing. And this can be for a lot of reasons, but it may be to confirm a diagnosis if there is no known family history of HD. Like in Denise's case, she mentioned that before her father had symptoms, nobody had heard of this. So that can be helpful for that reason. Or if family members did not have a diagnosis confirmed with genetic testing. Like in Stacy's case, her mom thought she had MS and didn't feel like she had a need to check that out further. And a genetic counselor can explain the benefits and drawbacks of testing. So while you're at your clinic visit, it's likely that you'll be prescribed some medications, although certainly not always. And there are lots of different classes of drugs that might be prescribed. So we have drugs to control movement, antipsychotic drugs, and then other medications that might also help with some of the chorea issues. So the drugs to control movement include tetrabenazine or xenazine, and this is always a hard one for me to pronounce, tetrabenazine or Austedo, and those can help control chorea. So some of the movements in Huntington's. And some of the antipsychotic drugs might include haloperidol, Haldol, risperidone or Risperdal. Olanzapine is also known as Zyprexa, and quetiapine, also known as Seroquel. And so some of the drugs that might also help suppress chorea could include amantadine, which now comes as Gocovri or Osmolex. And then also we have Keppra and Klonopin that may also be helpful. And some of those do also kind of cross over and help sometimes with mood and other issues as well. But again, there's, you know, these drugs can have side effects, and your doctor will talk to you about weighing out the benefits and the drawbacks of taking different medications. And then the other thing is because HD is constantly evolving in the body, these drugs may be helpful for you at one point in time and then not be helpful moving forward. And so it's something that you definitely want to talk to your doctor about when you notice that your medicine's not really doing what you had hoped it would do. And it may just be a matter of changing a dose or something like that, but sometimes a switch can be helpful. And then there are medications that deal with psychiatric disorders. So we have antidepressants, antipsychotic drugs, and mood stabilizing drugs. So the antidepressants might include citalopram, also known as Celexa. We have Lexapro, fluoxetine is Prozac, and sertraline, also known as Zoloft. And then the antipsychotic drugs, some of these you may have noticed from the previous slide. So quetiapine, Seroquel, Risperdone, Risperdal, and olanzapine, also known as Zyprexa. And then our mood stabilizing drugs. So you may be prescribed Depakote or carbamazepine, which comes as a couple different other brand name drugs, and lamotrigine, also known as Lamictal. And again, a lot of these drugs have different uses that aren't just psychiatric, and so sometimes they can also potentially help with movement or other issues that you might be having. So when you go to see your doctor, they may ask you a little bit about how your speech is going and also how your swallowing is. And so there may be a referral to a speech therapist. There may be a speech therapist on site at the clinic that you attend. And so you may have an evaluation there, or they just kind of come by and just see how you're doing. You may be asked to go and seek out speech therapy elsewhere. But basically, they can help you to improve your ability to speak clearly. Sometimes they help to teach you how to use different communication devices if speech is too difficult. Sometimes it may be a board with pictures. Sometimes they have some really amazing technology that they might have access to. And then they also help to address some of the issues around the muscles used for eating and swallowing. They may make suggestions for thinning out food, or for what texture food would be helpful for you to swallow, or if any of the liquids that you need actually need to be thickened. So they can kind of go through and talk to you about that. A physical therapist can be really helpful. You may also, again, see a physical therapist at the clinic that you attend, but it's possible you may seek that elsewhere. And ideally, a physical therapist is going to be able to teach you about appropriate and safe exercises that enhance strength, flexibility, balance, and coordination. So in many neurological issues, balance is a particularly tricky one that actually can't really be dealt with medication. So one of the things we know is that if anything's going to help, it would be physical therapy. And so it's really important to seek that out. And also a physical therapist can be really great in figuring out what the best movement device would be for you. If a walker or a wheelchair would be better, if they think that you would be able to use a cane for now, and that would be helpful. So sometimes having a physical therapist watch you walk and use some of these pieces of equipment, they can figure out which the best one is. And then also to help you to come up with an exercise regimen that can be adapted as your level of mobility changes. And then, of course, we have an occupational therapist. So again, you may see this person at the clinic when you go. It's possible that you may be referred out. Sometimes occupational, physical, and speech therapy are done in the home. That's one of the benefits of getting Medicare, is that actually that's one of the things that Medicare will cover in the home. And so basically what an occupational therapist does is they help you to kind of adapt the things that you do in everyday life to be able to improve your functional abilities. So they may help you to figure out how to use different assistive devices, and there's many really interesting options out there. They may help you with finding utensils for, and different cups or bowls for eating if motor skills are an issue. And they can kind of show you where handrails maybe should go. Sometimes they do safety evaluations of your home. They might be able to go in and say like, hey, this furniture probably needs to be moved. This area rug, those are a big deal. As pretty as it is, maybe isn't safe anymore. So that's a little bit of what an occupational therapist might do. And then support people and social workers. Hopefully there's a social worker involved with your clinic, and if not, hopefully they know where to refer you to one. HDSA has many social workers throughout the country, and so if you need to find one in your state, you can actually search for them on the hdsa.org website. And a social worker might be able to refer you to different referrals that provide support within the community for a variety of issues. Ideally, they can help you point you in the right direction to start the process of applying for disability. Hopefully, they also know how to get in touch with Allison Bartlett, who is the HDSA lawyer, who has a ton of information on disability, and she's fantastic. So often that's what we do, is we refer that way. Your social worker might run a support group, or ideally can refer you to one if they don't run one. And they also may be knowledgeable on end-of-life issues. So sometimes there are legal papers that need to be filled out around those issues, or it just may be about talking about when it might be time for hospice. And so sometimes a social worker can be helpful for that as well. So what can you do to prepare for your appointment? And again, every clinic runs a little differently. So it may, over time, as you get used to your visits, you may have a better idea of how to prepare. But I think spending a little bit of time in the week or two before you go to your visit, it can be really helpful to start writing some of this stuff down, because I think most of us have had the experience of being in a doctor's office, any doctor's office, and then walking out the door and going, I totally forgot to ask that question that I've been meaning to ask for 6 months and totally forgot. So make sure you bring it with you. And so you want to make sure you have a list of all your medications and their doses, including any vitamins or any supplements that you take. Sometimes supplements can interfere with different medications, so it's really important that your doctor knows that. Anything that's been different from your last appointment, or anything that isn't normal for you. So whatever the symptom could be, if you've noticed that there's an increase in problems related to your movement, or if there's an increase in issues, with your mood or anything like that, that's something you want to bring up. It's also important to bring up any recent changes or stresses in your life. Has there been a death in your family? Has there been an addition to your family? Have you moved? I once saw a list of the top 20 stressful things that happen to people, and it's something like as mundane as, you were, one of your major appliances went and wasn't expected. It sounds like not that big of a deal, except it is kind of a big deal if you suddenly need to go buy a refrigerator and weren't planning for it. So anything that causes difficulty or stress in your life is something you want to bring up. And any family history of Huntington's disease or any other psychiatric or movement conditions that exist in your family. So sometimes in many families, there may be, looking back, you kind of think, oh, well, yeah, so-and-so had this, or, they were a little moody, or, anything. Because sometimes what happens is people have symptoms, beginning symptoms of Huntington's disease, but then maybe they die from something else. And so we never really know that that was Huntington's disease. So that may be important information for your doctor to know. And then it's important also to bring any images or records that you have with you. You may not have any to bring, but if you do, if you've ever had an MRI or a CT scan or anything like that, it's really important to take that with you. And you may want a family member or friend to come with you to your appointment. I know that that's often really helpful for the doctor and the support staff to be able to talk to another person in your home and to see how it's going. And they may be able to remember things that you just didn't remember, just like many of us do, and to offer a different perspective. And then what to expect from your doctor. So your doctor is likely to ask you a number of questions, including the following. So when did you begin asking or experiencing symptoms? And what did that feel like for you? Have they been continuous, intermittent? Do they just show up once in a while? Your doctor might, again, want to know if anyone in your family has ever been diagnosed with Huntington's disease. Or again, another movement disorder or a different psychiatric disorder. How are you functioning? Are you having more trouble performing at work? Are you having trouble concentrating on schoolwork? Are you able to get your daily tasks done? Your doctor may want to know if anybody in your family is in a nursing home. Your doctor may also want to know if anybody in your family has a lot of extra movements. Maybe that's the only thing that's going on for them, and so maybe there hasn't been a connection made. If you've noticed a change in your general mood, or you just kind of not feeling yourself, that's something your doctor's going to want to know. And do you feel sad all of the time? There may be some things that they can do to help with the depression piece. And then, of course, have you ever thought about suicide? Because that's certainly something we want to address. We want to see if we can get a safety plan in place and figure out how to make sure to keep you safe. All right, so that concludes my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right, so does anybody have any thoughts or questions about any of that?
I have a question about the parity.
Yes. Oh, I'd love to hear that.
Couple of questions about that. First off, I've been involved with Huntington's forever. So I've heard about this many years ago. And my friends have written letters, and it's getting very discouraging. So I'm curious if it was more before 12 years ago. I mean, 2022. Or, I'm sorry, you said it was 2012 you started, I think. Okay, so I remember hearing about it long before that and asking my friends to write. But what I'm trying to get at, do you have a list of those who have already supported it that we might be able to look at?
Yeah, we do. As part of the advocacy caucus, they put together, they actually broke it up by state. And
Yeah.
so each state has So far, as a result of the fly-in, we only had four or five sign on for it. So there is that information by state and as part of the advocacy caucus stuff, and we could give you that information.
Okay, I'm from Pennsylvania. But I
Yeah,
know that
there's Pennsylvania people in there too.
yeah, I know we've been through this before, but I'll hope for the best this time.
I know it's frustrating because we've been trying, and every time the Congress changes, we have to start all over again.
Right.
So this time, we're trying to get it done within that 2-year period.
Okay.
And I met with Pennsylvania regulators a couple years ago when we had a fly-in there too, and they were supportive of it.
Hmm.
But it's been. And they at the end of last year, ALS had the waiting period and they waived it for that. So we're trying.
Right.
Yeah.
I
So we're
remember
trying to.
I remember that it's been a long time that ALS has been waived. So that's
Yeah.
where I thought we were building on that. And I
Yeah,
suppose we are trying.
we're trying.
No, I appreciate it. Okay. And I have a question about HIPAA. I don't know if anybody
Try to answer
can
that.
address that.
Carolyn.
Maybe Carolyn or somebody. But the question, my brother's in a nursing home, and there have been instances where they say, oh, they can't do that. I made up a paper of do's and don'ts to take care of them and everything, and I don't believe they ever got very far. And they keep saying, well, we're not allowed to know what's wrong with them, which I think is a little odd. And when he was first admitted, he had aspiration pneumonia, so they told us not to give him water. And I asked, well, can you put a sign up in the room? Oh no, we can't do that. That's HIPAA, that's against HIPAA. And to me, and then one of his friends gave him water and he got aspiration pneumonia again. So I don't understand where, I think they're not very understanding of HIPAA, I don't think, but I thought I'd ask the pros.
Yeah, no, that does seem odd. I mean, so what HIPAA means that, they shouldn't just disclose his private medical information without permission. I would imagine that you as his family are listed as people who have permission to hear information about his health. As far as disclosing something, usually in a nursing home, maybe it shouldn't be on the door to the hallway, but I would think that once you enter his private space, which I realize it may not be a private room, but that there should be something listed there that, I mean, we all know when we've been in the hospital and they have the dry erase board and, it'll have a few bits of information. Chances are your roommate can see that information. And as far as I know, that hasn't been considered a HIPAA violation, for them to say, oh, this patient needs a diabetic diet, or fall risk is written all over everything. So why would water be a problem?
Well, at that time, he was in a private room. So it was really annoying and upsetting when he got the problems with swallowing again. But now, this is a few years later, now they won't let us to the rooms because of COVID, a little bit of an excuse. And so now but when I did go up there one time, they let me go up. They had a big sign that said honey consistency for the liquid. So I think they're doing it now, but I don't understand.
No, you're probably right that they were using HIPAA as an excuse, which is a shame because that just seems like some very important information for people to have. One of the things that we do as HDSA social workers, and one of the regions I cover is Pennsylvania, is we do education for nursing home staff. And so, if you want to ever let me know what the home is, if they're open to having a presentation, we used to do them in person. We can certainly do them on Zoom now, explaining some of the behaviors, some of the things to look out for, and some of the ways to deal with different things, so that people understand HD a little better. And I realize, in nursing homes, there's often high turnover, and so maybe we need to come back every year and do this education. But many of us throughout the country do that. And so that's certainly something I'd be happy to do.
Thank you. We've asked them numerous times, but thank you.
Yeah, and I respect that you know you have to kind of work within the system that you have, and it we know that placement in nursing homes is definitely an issue for HD. And actually, that reminds me. Normally, this education day is done at Leisure Chateau in New Jersey, in Lakewood, New Jersey. And so I just wanted to also say thank you to them for the work that they do and their understanding of HD. They have a dedicated HD unit. And so maybe someday after COVID is past, hopefully, we will get back to doing our in-person meeting there. But until then, we do appreciate the work that they do. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, then I will turn it over to Eva. She's going to be talking to us about genetics. And Eva, do you want to share your own slides?
Yep, I can pull them up right now. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing, so I think you may need to enable.
Yes, I'm going to make you the host right now. All right, and then just let me know if there's any issue.
Okay, should be fine.
Okay. Excellent.
Perfect. Okay. Great. Want to make sure that everyone can see that and it's in the right view. Okay.
Looks good.
Perfect. Great. I'm just gonna rearrange you guys just a little bit so I can look at my slides and still see you a little bit. Okay, perfect. So as Corlin was saying, and thank you so much, Corlin, for your great presentation. I really didn't know the whole setup of the way that these clinic meetings are set up and your appointments and all of that. So that was very helpful and informative. And then also thank you to Stacy and then also Denise for sharing your stories. It was very informational, and I don't think I've ever heard on either of your HD stories. So I really did appreciate listening to that, and thank you for sharing. So for myself, I am a genetic counseling student at Rutgers. And so I know some of you may already be past the testing stage in your life of testing for HD, or your family members are past that stage, or most of them at least. But I know that, there is always the chance that there are more distant family members like nieces, nephews, grandchildren, children who are maybe still in the process of considering whether they want to do genetic testing for HD. So I thought I'd kind of, occupy my niche, which is really genetic counseling and, counseling about decision-making and whether to test or not to test. And I think when Corlin talked about genetic counseling, she mentioned that that is our main job. And so I thought I'd give a brief presentation on decision-making when it comes to testing for the HD gene and, various factors to consider. And then also kind of focusing on GINA, which is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. Because actually a lot of people in the HD field don't really know about it. And if you do, I think that's great. But I actually found a paper when I was doing research that not that many people who are at risk for developing HD know about GINA. So I think it's really something important to talk about. So just a little bit about me. Like I said, I am a second-year genetic counseling student at Rutgers. I'm pursuing a master's degree in genetic counseling. I am in my last year. It's only a 2-year program, so I'm graduating in May. And then hopefully, after I pass my boards, I'll be a certified genetic counselor. I have been involved with HDSA for about 2 years now, or 2.5 years. I lived in Dallas for about 2 years. And when I was there, I helped work, or at least for a year when I was there, I was working as a support group leader for 2 support groups in the affiliate that's located there. So it's not a chapter, it's like the North Texas affiliate. But I was there and I helped manage those support groups. I learned a lot about HD. And then when I moved to New Jersey for school, I really wanted to be involved. And so now I am the secretary for the HD board. Work with Stacy, I work with Corlin, so we all work together. And so Corlin invited me to talk today, and I'm grateful to talk to you all. So briefly, and I kind of went over this a little bit, but I'm going to just go over my agenda of just what is a genetic counselor for those of you who might not be aware. I mean, hopefully in the HD sphere, you guys might have a better understanding of what genetic counselors are than the general population, but I thought I might just briefly go over that. talk about genetic counseling and how it relates to HD, and really how our job is ingrained in this idea of facilitating decision-making for patients, especially when it comes to the idea of genetic testing and whether to do it or not. And so even though some of you might be past the idea of, should I test, should I not test? You know, I feel like people usually in their 30s and their 20s are really thinking about that. So, but you might have people who are thinking about it in your life. And then also talking about GINA, which is really, really important. And then I'll just wrap up with kind of a flow chart that I made, which hopefully is helpful. And you can have these slides if anyone is interested. I'm happy to share them. So first of all, what is a genetic counselor? And I think the best people to explain it are part of our national society. So the National Society of Genetic Counselors defines a genetic counselor as someone who has advanced training, first of all, in medical genetics, but then also in counseling to help guide and support patients seeking information about how inherited diseases and conditions might affect them or their families. And we also interpret genetic testing results and, you know, the implications of a test result based on personal and family history. So specifically, how genetic counseling relates to HD, our job is really to talk patients through genetic testing and then really helping, like I said, with that decision-making process. And as we are all very much aware, there's a lot of factors to consider when thinking about genetic testing for HD. And different family members might have different reasons to test or not to test. I mean, there's certainly lots of room for there to be a familial conflict within, oh, this person's testing, this person doesn't want to test. And so I think that helping families talk through these things and talking through the factors that might influence their decision to test or not test is something that it's really, you know, our job, our niche, and really to help people come to these decisions. So as we all know, HD is a very, very difficult disease. And part of what makes it so difficult are those decisions that come along with it. And I pulled just, you know, just some off the top of my head, and there's so much more than this, but first of all, like my job is helping and is deciding whether to undergo genetic testing. So first of all, do I undergo genetic testing? How do I pay for care if I do have the gene, if I'm gene positive? Like, can I handle the result of this? So really the mental and like the psychological weight of having a positive result for HD is really, really taxing. And it's sometimes really, really anxiety inducing for people who are at risk or asymptomatic and then, you know, are at risk for being symptomatic. You know, can they handle that waiting period, just waiting until they might have symptoms? How will my family react? Let's say you're the first person testing for the gene, or if you have a family history and you know you have a parent, you know, who's really hoping that you're gene negative, you know, how are they going to react? What do I tell my kids? So if you test positive, what do you tell them? You know, how old are they? There's so many things to consider in that respect. Like also, if you're young enough to consider, should I even have kids? You know, you test positive and you're in your 20s and you're thinking about it, you're like, oh my gosh, like, do I want to pass this on? And some people decide to, and some people decide not to. But then there's also the option of prenatal genetic testing. You know, you can test your baby to see if it has the gene, you can test embryos. And that's not the main topic of this presentation, but if anyone wants more information on that, that's really something that's that we do in New Jersey and at Rutgers, is to test embryos or well to test prenatal fetuses to see if they have the gene. And then you can also go through IVF and test to see whether embryos have the gene. And then also just this idea of like, why me? Like, why do I have to be the person making all of these decisions and thinking about all these questions? Because clearly this is a very, very difficult thing to go through. It changes your life. It changes your family's life. It changes the course of everything that you're going through. And so it really is something important to think about when it comes to decision making and how all of these factors weigh in to your personal decision to test or your family members' personal decisions to test, because there's a lot to weigh and there's so much more than this, but this is what I came up with. So as genetic counselors, our fundamental like key tenets of what we do are to be non-directive and non-judgmental when we talk to patients about deciding whether they want to do genetic testing. So there is no right answer when it comes to whether you want to test for the gene or not. So really our job is to help guide people through this decision, but in no way to tell you to do it or not to do it or to judge your choices in that respect. Our job is also to help people become better informed. So really people might come in to see us and not really have much of an idea of what HD is, you know, oh, like my grandfather had it, I don't know, like I'm not in contact with my father and I just want to know what's going on. So really to help people and educate people in terms of, you know, doing these types of presentations, but then also when we have a patient in front of us talking about decision-making when it comes to testing decisions and how the backbone of information you have might help guide that informational decision. And then also hopefully by discussing these issues involved with caring professionals like us, hopefully people who are thinking about testing have the best opportunity to make these types of informed decisions about whether testing is right at this point in their lifetime. So in terms of approaching the decision-making process, I pulled together a list of factors that might be helpful for people who are thinking about, oh, should I test for the gene? Should I not test for the gene? And we'll specifically get into GINA when it comes to this list. But of course, I'll just go through a list of factors. You can see factors are along the left. When it comes to testing, thinking about what would happen if I did test positive, those will be in the middle column, and then all the way to the right, what about if I don't test, how will it affect this factor? So of course, I mean, the main idea here is that you're testing for information, right? So if you test, it means you want that information. You want to know whether you're gene positive or not. It's an intrinsic want that you feel versus not testing. Of course, if you don't want to know, there's so many people that don't want to know. And I believe actually some of you might be familiar with Dr. McCormick. He is a doctor who works at Robert Wood Johnson, and he told me, I've had some conversations with him, that only about 90%, well, actually about 90% of people decide not to test for the gene and just wait until they're symptomatic, and only about 10% decide to do at-risk or pre-symptomatic testing. And I was very surprised to hear that the discrepancy is so large. And so a lot of people don't want to know this information, and that's totally okay, but some people do. Also thinking about family and family members. So if you want to test, maybe you want to share this information with your family members. Let's say you're symptomatic and you want to give your family some answers about why this might be going on with you, but then also what your family's risks might be to develop HD in the future. But then there's also this this other idea that there might be some controversy in the family where some people might not want to know. So, you know, there's always this kind of case that comes up when it comes to like medical ethics, where let's say, you know, a grandparent had HD, you have a parent who doesn't want to test. So you're going through these 3 generations, and then you have a kid who does want to test, right? But you know that this gene is inherited. So if a child here in this bottom generation tests positive, you know that this parent who doesn't want to know their own status is actually positive for the gene, because there's no other way. There's a very slight, small chance it came from the other parent, but we don't think that that's the case. So then this parent would find out their status without really consenting to it. So really family is a huge, huge idea. And that's why, you know, family is really important in HD. It's something that I remember we were at the HD walk just a few weeks ago, about a month ago, and there were like, family is everything was kind of the quote. It really is. And when it comes to making these decisions, your family is really involved. So it's important to consider that factor. And then this, I'll be getting into a little bit more detail, but also the legal implications. So if you test positive for the gene, you might be at risk for what's called genetic discrimination. And I'll talk about that in a second. But that's something really big to consider when you're making testing decisions, especially if you're pre-symptomatic or at risk. Also just, you know, the variety of emotions that are involved with testing for HD, you know, it's relieving sometimes when you find out. Of course, if you're negative, it's very relieving, but if you're positive, sometimes people are, you know, relieved in that, okay, like now I can plan for my future. Now I can take out, you know, insurance plans that I might need to, or I might be able to prepare best. I can prepare my family for what is to come. And then they also, people who test might think it's just better to know. rather than not. And then a lot of people, that 90%, think that it's too much anxiety to know whether they're positive for HD or not. And that is a perfectly valid reason, because, you know, you might not live your life as well as you would want to if you know that you're positive and you're just kind of waiting for the onset of symptoms. So that's really very serious, a serious factor to consider. Also, I know that a lot of the time when we talk about HD, we think, oh, I'm gene positive or I'm gene negative. And that's a very simple kind of black and white way to look at it. But those of you who are really invested in kind of knowing about the genetics for HD, and I can briefly explain it, there is an intermediate range for the CAG repeats for HD. So there is, you know, of course, the not at risk for HD, not at risk for passing anything on range. And then we know that 36 and up is diagnostic for HD, but there is that 20, I believe it's 27 to 34 repeat range where you personally are likely not at risk for developing HD in your lifetime. But we know that when fathers pass on the gene to their children, so specifically when paternal lineage is passing on the gene, not when mom does, but when dad does, there can be an expansion of the CAG repeat. So sometimes someone who has, let's say, 29 repeats might have a kid who then has, 37 repeats because it expanded, the CAG repeat got longer. That is really a lot to think about. So it's not sometimes, I'm testing positive, I'm testing negative. Sometimes people test, positive for that intermediate range. And so, they think I'm not at risk, but my kids might be. And so it's really, you might not get this really concrete, solid information that you want to know. So that's really something to consider as well. And of course, cost and finances is always a huge, huge, huge factor in HD care in general, but then also when it comes to testing. So if you do test positive, you have a positive genetic test result in front of you. So you might be able to, get coverage for things, as soon as symptoms onset, because you can tell your insurance, I have a reason to have OT, going to see a neurologist, et cetera. But sometimes genetic testing can be expensive. And then also, let's say you're trying to do the embryo testing, you're trying to do prenatal testing, that is a lot of cost associated as well. So that's why people might not want to test as well. And then also just in terms of pursuing management, this might not be as applicable because I feel like HD patients typically do need some kind of symptom management because otherwise it's just really, really difficult to cope. But some people decide that, if I get it, I get it. I don't really want to try and go through all the hoops to try and make myself have fewer symptoms. I just want to live my life. And then some people decide to pursue management. And so if you think that you would just rather live your life and just, continue on and just see what happens, then, you might not want to test. But if you think you would want to manage the disease as best as you can, then some people choose to test for that reason. So specifically to talk about genetic discrimination, I've found a paper actually when I was preparing for this presentation that a lot of at-risk individuals, like I said, don't know about GINA. And so I really wanted to give some attention to this. So what is GINA? And GINA stands for the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. And it's a federal law that was passed in May 2008. And it protects against genetic discrimination in the workplace and then also through your own health insurance. So it's actually a pretty good law in essence. These institutions can't deny they cannot use your positive HD gene testing results to deny you employment and then health insurance coverage. So it's really great, right? Overall, if you're trying to find work, if you're trying to get health insurance and you have a positive genetic test result, you're at risk. These types of institutions can't pull these results and then use them as a reason to deny you coverage. So really, what's the problem with GINA? It sounds so great. It has its own loopholes and it has its own caveats, and that's really important to talk about. So what GINA doesn't cover is insurance discrimination when it comes to life, disability, and long-term care insurance. And if you were listening to Stacy, she said that she got her life insurance policy in place. I think she said long-term care as well. And so the idea of this presentation is really to inform people about GINA and then what to do if you have an at-risk HD patient and they're considering testing, but they don't want their genetic test result to be used against them when it comes to this type of insurance. What do people do? So first of all, you want to consider whether these types of plans would be of benefit to you, which a lot of the time for people who have HD or are at risk for HD, and who end up testing positive, these plans are very important because it helps them cover really essential things that they use to help manage the disease. But a lot of at-risk individuals actually end up taking out these types of plans before they undergo genetic testing, and that's really, really important. So if you are at risk but you don't test positive, you take out these types of plans, and then they can't use this type of result to be like, oh, we're denying you coverage. Like, we see you have a positive test result. If you don't have that test result in your medical record, then these types of insurance companies can't use that against you. It doesn't exist. It's not there yet. So if you take out these types of plans before you test, it ends up being a really big benefit to you because you end up paying less, and you will likely have that type of coverage versus if you do have a positive test result, you might not even get coverage in the first place. So it's really important to talk with your relatives who are at risk, who are considering testing about GINA, to see how that would impact their insurance plans and decisions to take out certain types of insurance. And I do have some resources here. Like I said, these slides are welcome to anyone who wants them. HDSA actually has a specific page where they talk about GINA. It has a lot of information. So that's important to go through. And it also has information if you feel like you have been discriminated against, to reach out to specific resources in that respect. And then the bottom two are really just informational. So you can share that with your families. So when it comes to whether you're still deciding not to test or not to test, right, our main job as genetic counselors are to really help people hone in on the factors that are most important to them when it comes to deciding whether to do testing. So of course, I made this flow chart essentially that might be helpful. Hopefully it is, in terms of making that decision. So first, of course, what you do is you state the decision that needs to be made. So do I test? Do I not test for the HD gene? And then you think about it. Okay, so first of all, there might be something really concrete that's stopping you from getting testing. Like going back to the same idea where you had a grandparent who had HD, a parent who doesn't want to know, and then a child who does want to know. Maybe that parent who doesn't want to know is your main reason that is concrete and stopping you from deciding to get testing. So it might even throw the option of testing out the window for you. So really just trying to think of all the options available. And so for most people, that's do I test or do I not test? But then there also might be financial limitations. There might be location limitations. Let's say you live in a really rural area. How do I access genetic testing? Where do I go? Right. And hopefully if you want to test, you can access that, but you want all the options in front of you before you try and make this decision. And then you think about all of the relevant factors, and we went over a lot of them already. So who in my family will be affected by these results? Because HD is a family disease, it's inherited. Who's going to be affected? My kids, my parents, my cousins, everyone is involved. And so sometimes you might want to take that into account, especially if you're really close with your family, you really want their input. Some people don't want to take that into account. They think this is my testing, this is my genetics, and I deserve to know. That's fine. It's really just how you're weighing these factors. Finances. So if I test positive, do I know how I'm going to cover things, or do I know how I'm going to cover the genetic testing? And then also Corlin mentioned this, but having a support system is especially important in HD. HD patients, as I'm sure some of you may be aware, have extremely high suicide rates compared to the general population. It's a very, very sad thing that is hard to talk about, but it's important to talk about. I'm pretty sure, I'm like 99% sure that you are technically or typically not allowed to go to a disclosure session, whether you're gene positive or negative, without a support person there. So really making sure that if you're thinking about undergoing testing, do you have someone to support you in this, who can help you through this? Because it's almost impossible to go through alone. And then it kind of in relation to that, your general feelings toward testing as well. So do I have that support? Would I be okay? That's why most people who test undergo a psych assessment. Would I be okay after I test positive? Would my entire life, of course, everyone's entire life would be flipped upside down, but in the end, just really trying to forecast whether you'll be okay, because it's important to have your mental health, and if you want to know this information, really being prepared to receive it. And then also GINA, like we talked about. So thinking about genetic discrimination, do I have my plans in place? Do I have my policies in place? Do I want these types of policies? And things like that. And then when you figure out all the factors that are applicable to you, narrowing down what's most important. So let's say your hypothetical person is thinking about genetic testing and they say, overall, I'm on, because the spectrum of wanting to test and not wanting to test is extremely wide. Some people may be leaning toward, I'm absolutely not going to test at all. And some people might just say, it's not even a question of going to test, I want to know. Let's say this patient that I'm thinking of has narrowed down these two factors at GINA, and their feelings toward testing are the main factors they're trying to consider. Let's say they're right in the middle. They're like, I want to know, but I don't want to know. I have no idea. I'm just so torn. They've identified that as a major factor that'll really be important for them when it comes to swinging that decision. And then let's say they're like, oh, I know I want to test, but I don't have my life insurance policy in place. And that's something I really need and really think I want if I do test positive, because it'll make everything a bit less costly later on down the road. So really just taking focus and pinpointing what you think is most important to you when it comes to deciding to test or not. And then evaluating, how each option satisfies each factor. And what that means is, like, for example, if I test positive, how does that affect my insurance options? If I test negative, how does that affect my insurance options? If I test positive, how am I going to react? How am I going to feel? What am I going to do? Like, how do I plan on coping? If I test negative, how do I plan on, releasing the weight of that? Because a lot of people think that they're going to be positive, and then if they end up being negative, it's really shocking to them. There was actually a story that one of my clinical supervisors once told me about, where there were two twins who were at risk for HD because their parents, one of their parents had it, and they lived their entire lives thinking that they would be positive. Essentially, they knew from a very young age that they are at risk for the gene, and then they went until I think they're like late 30s, not being symptomatic, and then finally deciding to test. They were both negative, and they cried because they were sad, because this was something that was so shocking to them that they were just so mentally prepared to be positive. This just really changed their entire perception of themselves and how their future is going to go. And so it's really, it's really important to think about mental state in both capacities, testing positive and testing negative. So, and then in the end, really considering, and after you pinpoint those factors, deciding what is the most desirable outcome for you and what you think will be best for you and your family in this case. So hopefully that was helpful. I know that some of you might not relate too much to my presentation, and that's okay. Like, I know that, Stacy shared her story. She's tested positive. She knows that she's not going to be doing testing at any point soon, but I saw she has an at-risk son. So maybe this is going to be helpful for her and other people in her family. I'm happy to take any questions if any of you have any thoughts, but I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Eva. I really appreciate your presentation. There were a couple things that stuck out for me, actually. What Dr. McCormick had said about only about 10% of patients deciding to test that was really surprising to me. I had assumed it would be about 50-50.
I also did. I was extremely surprised.
Yeah, that was really surprising. Yeah, so who knew that? And I think it's also really important to point out that, sometimes it's our assumption that a negative test would be a joyous occasion. But I think for a lot of people whose family identities are very much tied to HD, and then also having, maybe watched the suffering of other family members, that, there's some guilt involved in that. And, some other issues around it. So it may not be what we might assume, like, oh, yay, negative is good. That, there may be some complications around that. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah, you actually made me think of my brother, because my brother hasn't been tested yet, and he lived his whole life thinking he has it. And so I thought he gave a really fascinating presentation. I was shocked by the 90% too. But I get it, because I went through that process. But I remember too, I went through it 25 years ago. So I was able to pay for it out of pocket. It didn't show up in my medical records anywhere. The long-term care policies were different. They didn't ask you about Huntington's like they do today, so yeah. And it's my daughter who's at risk, actually. My son was tested negative in utero with CVS sampling, and that was awful. But I found out because I wanted a lot of kids. I wanted a football team. And then I was like, yeah, I'm good with 2. But thank you.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, I was trying to look at your family tree, because that's our main job. We collect family histories. And so I was like looking at your family tree, and I was like, okay, one child is at risk, the other one's negative.
Ava, can I ask a question about the intermediate range?
Yeah, of course.
I have read stuff, but what exactly is the intermediate range? And is it possible for not only for the intermediate range to hop up into positive territory, but is it possible for someone to move up from over generations to move up into the intermediate range?
Right. So I actually anticipated this question. So I ended up, I have like a couple cheat sheet notes for me, but essentially 27 to 35 CAG repeats is this intermediate range. So if you're at 26 or below, you're not considered to be able to expand this gene mutation, and you're not expected to be at risk. Essentially, that's normal. So at general population, your average person on the street will have 26 or fewer of those CAG repeats. Now, 27 to 35 is that intermediate range. And this is where it gets kind of dicey when it comes to explaining genetics. It gets a little bit more complicated. But what we do know about HD is that it is a paternally expanded condition. So meaning that if you have mom and if you have dad, and if dad has the intermediate range, he can then have a child if he passes on the HD gene that ends up having the full-blown disease. Because let's say, like I was trying to explain before, they have 29 repeats. Then that CAG, remember, it's this like trinucleotide repeat, if that sounds familiar to some of you. It's the CAG repeat coming, counting over and over and over again in that gene. And so when it gets passed on, there can be, it's like a genetic type of slippage that essentially the repeat expands. But if mom has it, it really doesn't tend to expand. If mom passes it on, she has 29 repeats, her child will likely have 29 repeats. But then when it comes to paternal transmission, it can expand. And so that's why it gets complicated. There's other genetic diseases where you have maternal expansion, which, we're still really trying to figure out what that means. Mm-hmm. But we do know that if you're in that intermediate range and you're a male and then you have a child, there's that risk for expansion, but very much less so if you're a mother and you're having a child in that intermediate range. Is that making sense?
That makes sense. My other question, which just occurred to me now, was, can over the course of, let's say, 2 or 3 generations, could a paternal line go from, let's say, 24 to 29 and eventually to 36?
It's certainly possible. So what we are finding, and what Dr. McCormick has said, is that we're finding people more and more who have Huntington's disease. And now we're not quite sure why that is. We're not sure if they have these 24 repeats, which is considered, very much in the normal range, that still ends up expanding and then creating HD, or if we're just discovering a lot more people who have this disease in the general population because there is more awareness about it, there's more genetic testing available and things like that.
People are living longer.
People are living longer, and you see like, okay, if someone has, let's say 36 repeats, yeah, let's consider that they're going to have HD. Yes, they're positive. They're going to develop symptoms at some point, but their onset, we know, is linked to how many of these repeats they have. So someone with 36 repeats is likely going to have a lot fewer symptoms or later onset of the disease mostly versus someone who has like 45, 50 repeats. And then we know that juvenile HD is 60 or more repeats. And that is certainly possible where someone is, let's say, in the intermediate range and a great grandfather passes it on to his, son, who then has his son. And then you eventually might have someone with juvenile HD just with the expansion of the gene.
As a follow-up, I really appreciate that explanation. As I said, I've been involved for 100 years, it feels like. But we were always told that if it came from the mother, the onset was very similar in time. And the father, it was all over the place.
Right.
And I saw that in my family. But then I was told, no, that's not exactly right anymore. But this really zeroes in on it, that it's just this intermediate portion that causes that from the father. So that's most helpful. Thank you very much.
Of course. And yeah, so like if we know a father does have, like 36 is considered diagnostic age for HD, right? If you have 36 or more repeats, you're considered to be gene positive. We expect you to develop symptoms. Almost everyone will, right? Who has the 36 or more. This intermediate range just gets really dicey where, you could expand from the intermediate range, but you can still expand from a full gene mutation. So even if father is positive, he has 36 repeats, he starts, showing symptoms in his late 60s. You could still have a kid that he passes on, instead 40, and then they start showing earlier. So yeah, it's not fun. To have to explain that, and then to also see that happen in your family, because you want to expect a similar disease onset to your family and to your relatives, but then that isn't always the case.
And it's interesting, like wanting to put some predictability to a disease that sometimes can be very unpredictable, and so being able to just pin it down just a little bit more, I think provides a tiny bit of comfort.
Right.
Thank you for that explanation. I think that is really helpful.
Of course.
Does anybody else have any more questions for Eva or for anybody on the panel here? No? I can't even tell you how much I appreciate you all coming here today on a Sunday. It's really humbling, I think, sometimes, to do this work and to work with everybody and hear them tell their stories and, do what we can to, push forward the push for more information, for a cure, and to help families. And so, to have you be here, it's really just a pleasure. And so I just want to thank our speakers today, Stacy, Denise, and Eva, much appreciated. I appreciate you giving your time. And this presentation should be available to be viewed. HDSA will send that out as well. So if anybody has any questions down the road, please feel free to reach out. My information is on the HDSA website, and Stacy shared our information on how to get in touch with us at the chapter. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and thank you all. I appreciate
Thank you, Carlin.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Bye-bye.
organizing
Bye,
this.
everybody.